Everyone who knows anything about the animated Storytime community on YouTube seems to have some kind of strong opinion of it. People who criticize this community say that they have no talent, their videos are lazily animated, and the concepts behind the videos are boring to no end. The one exception to this rule that I keep seeing brought up is a YouTuber by the name of TheOdd1sOut, but nobody has really explained why he's so different from these supposed garbage copycat channels, or what made his channel take off in the first place. There just seems to be something about TheOdd1sOut's overall style that's appealing to a lot of people. But regardless of what combination of talents propelled him to stardom, James Rallison's simple venture into the online video platform has led to rapid growth and innovation in his genre. Innovation that has brought about the dawn of a new age of animated commentary on YouTube, paving the way for the success of dozens of channels, for better or for worse. The channel that used to be TheOdd1sOut is now at the top of the competition. The thing that separates TheOdd1sOut as a project from most other YouTube channels is that it has roots that extend far beyond the channel itself. Most of us picked up a camera and/or a microphone one day and decided to film something for YouTube. We learned, we tried new things, we improved, and a lot of us, including myself, are still improving. We made a lot of mistakes. We posted things that should never have seen the light of day. But the important part is that we grew as content creators and gradually refined our content. James, however, didn't really need to do this as much because he had been making content as TheOdd1sOut long before he even thought about posting a YouTube video. I'm not going to try to explain the history of TheOdd1sOut to you because someone already did that. And also James helped write it, so any chance of me competing with that just went out the window. But there is some context which the video didn't really talk about that I think is important. First of all, James himself is a pretty smart guy. He wanted to be a math teacher for a while before his YouTube channel took off, but he enjoyed drawing more, so he ended up pursuing art instead. Not really helping my case. Around 2012, he started drawing comics, and it was a little rough at first. What you'll notice about his earlier comics is that they look nothing like his art style now. There's a very heavy emphasis on gradients, for example, and the color palette is a little inconsistent. Certain distinctive details are present, like the way the hair is drawn, or the fact that each character in the speech bubbles is drawn individually without a computer font, but none of it really stands out. This was his second ever comic on Tumblr. Remember the rules while I'm gone on my business trip. I don't want Jake to go on the computer. Last time he bought a hot dog stand and a snow cone machine. Alright, I'm off. I don't want any funny business.
Guys, how about we discuss my computer privileges over some snow cones?
What about the hot dogs? So, the humor's a bit rough too, but here, also, you can see he had a style very early on. Keep in mind, these are some of the first comics he ever published, and also he was 16, but judging by the fact that my audience is probably mostly people who watch his videos, maybe that doesn't sound very impressive to you guys. But when I started researching this video, I was surprised that this comic really just wasn't as bad as you'd expect from a first stab at comic writing. How many of us YouTubers were making decent attempts at humor right off the bat? I mean, I published my first video like 2 years ago, and it was a poorly edited B-movie meme. I'm not really in much of a position to judge anyone's early efforts. The thing that was really holding him back wasn't his sense of humor or even his writing, because those are things that develop gradually over time. I think it was his art style. These early comics were time-consuming to draw, and the payoff just didn't seem to be worth the effort. There came a point where he decided to change things completely and adopt a completely different art style. This new style featured simple white bubble characters. The art style was far less distracting, and it made the webcomic much easier to understand. A little over a year ago, I made a video on why I thought overly specific emojis were a dumb idea, and this is the part of the video where I tell you to go watch it so I could get twice as much ad revenue, but it's really not worth your time. For example, racially diverse emojis miss the point of what emojis are supposed to represent. By adding an unneeded layer of specificity to them, they become less about the emotion conveyed by the person and more about the person conveying the emotion. The same applies to characters in a webcomic. Even if it's just the difference of a split second between when you look at the comic and get the punchline, that processing time can make a massive difference towards its effect on you and how funny you find it. It's why word problems are so much more annoying than regular bare-bones math problems. There's so much more unnecessary detail to sift through, and it bogs you down. Could you make the case that, on the other hand, complicated humor gives you more intelligent, long-lasting enjoyment with greater replay value? Yeah, but we're not talking about a Comedy Central TV show here. We're talking about a 3-frame comic strip you scroll past while browsing Reddit as you take a dump on the toilet. It's just quick, consumable content. The Odd1sOut's humor evolved in this way and became more abstracted over time. He seemed to realize that there were unnecessary details in both the punchlines and the art that were weighing him down, and changed this arguably faster than he changed his art style. But as with all things, you have to strike a balance, in this case of specificity and abstractness. For some more context, there are actually a lot of popular comics out there that are a lot more abstract in their humor than the Odd1sOut. Webcomic Name, Poorly Drawn Lines, Altered, and Extra Fabulous are all great comics that range from simple abstraction to completely over-the-top. This trend was rising very rapidly in the early 2010s, but James never reached that level of simplification because he wanted to maintain what was and still is one of the core strengths of his humor: relatability. Oh no, did I just say the R word? I think relatable comedy has a bad rap because we're used to a specific brand of relatable comedy, such as Hannah Stocking's Instagram comedy or Brent Rivera's Instagram comedy. Yeah, pretty much anything from Instagram. Now, I'm a firm believer that anything can be funny. I think that in order for relatable comedy to be funny, however, a few things need to apply. First of all, it needs to be true. The problem with Lele Pond's comedy is it doesn't really make a lot of sense and relies on assumptions that nobody can really get behind. It starts off with a familiar premise like a Halloween costume party or the first day of class, but then things just sort of happen to different characters who in the end are just shallow, inaccurate caricatures. The skits all ultimately end up with Lele just making a silly face and you go on with your day. What I mean by this is it's not enough to start with a relatable premise like when you go to the doctor or when you break up with your boyfriend. You have to actually follow through. At the same time, relatable comedy can't be too tired. It doesn't mean it needs to be cutting edge or extremely clever. A lot of comedy comes simply from what is unexpected, even if it looks stupid. So when Ray William Johnson films a video where he steps on a Lego, it's not unexpected at all. Everyone knows that stepping on a Lego hurts, and you'd have to be really dumb to think that you were the only person who had this experience up until now. If you can't already tell, I'm trying really hard not to overanalyze humor here. All I'm trying to say is that good relatable comedy is comedy that people can both understand but also won't see coming. And James did this through the Odd1sOut comic strip. Now let me note that I'm not saying that his humor is even all that clever. Most of it was just a quick joke or a pun personified in a comic. Again though, you really can't compare it to the quality of something like Peanuts or Calvin and Hobbes because the context is completely different, and even they were rare exceptions. Bottom line, it's accessible, low-intensity content that takes less than 5 seconds to read, followed by a snort or another mild expression of amusement. And that's all that people really want out of a webcomic or memes or really any kind of humor these days, especially on the internet. James earned the reputation for being able to communicate with his audience on a level that few other comic strip artists were able to achieve. But until a few years ago, it was just that. A comic book strip made to be glanced at, snorted at, and quickly discarded amongst an endless sea of memes on Reddit. Just like a good webcomic should be, but still only a good webcomic. The comic strip format is very limiting, and James' creativity could not and did not end there. So while maintaining his Tumblr, he began to make his foray into YouTube. There isn't much of a reason why the Odd1sOut YouTube channel should have done as well as it did at first glance. There are plenty of great YouTube channels out there, but a lot of them don't even make it to 1 million subscribers, or if they do, it takes them a long time. For some reason, even from very early on, James possessed a lot of the qualities that dictate success for YouTube channels. First of all, he came in with a reasonably dedicated fan base and gained a few thousand subscribers early on. A following that, again, many channels take a long time to cultivate. At the time, Storytime animation was a relatively new and unexplored genre. You had animated channels such as Domix, which rose to fame from similar roots, but clearly he was offering something that they were not. Now, what exactly was the recipe for James' success on YouTube? Like all good research, I will explain this in the form of an anecdote. I remember when I first saw the first Odd1sOut video, I instantly recognized him, which made sense. I used to see his comics show up years before on Memebase and I Can Have Cheeseburger. Oh, like you're gonna judge me as if you didn't live through 2014 too? Those were lawless times. He was one of those figures I was instantly able to recognize even among the plethora of webcomics that were blowing up at the time. James's comics' childish nature yet distinct execution stuck out to me. So of course, with that level of credibility, I was more than intrigued to see how his style had adapted to YouTube. As you might expect, I, like most people, started watching the Odd1sOut after he became an established creator. Whether it was his collaborative music video with Boy in a Band, Life is Fun, or one of the entries in his Work Stories series, most people, myself included, got to see the best best of James as their first impression, but it wasn't always this way. Look, I'm certainly not one to dredge up past videos considering I wussed out and privated most of mine. I only recently stopped having cringe seizures related to my own debut commentary video. I don't like Snapchat very much.
So to start, let's take a look at the CNN thing. I'm not really sure what that is. Is it like a tabloid? Is it like MTV? I don't know.
But looking at the past and comparing it to the present gives us some surprising insights into how he grew as a creator. It's probably no surprise that there is a very sharp contrast between his oldest and newest content. I actually never even watched his first video, A Book I Made as a Kid, until kind of recently because, well, it didn't really interest me before. This just isn't the type of content you see in the recommended section on YouTube because there isn't much of a reason to watch it. It's some guy you potentially have never even heard of talking about a book he wrote when he was a kid. The video has some technical problems too. The audio is grainy, the art and animation is minimal and uninteresting, and most of all, James seems to be holding back in his delivery.
When I was in the 4th grade, we were assigned to write and illustrate a short story that we would make into a book.
I think when you're really young, you don't realize that you have a choice. Your parents just start taking you to soccer practice every Wednesday and you think, oh, okay, I guess I'm doing this now.
He really started taking off with his Sooubway series, where he talks about his misadventures as an employee at what apparently is a popular restaurant, Sooubway. I'd never heard of this place before watching his videos, and I don't know how they got away with calling it that, given the name's striking similarity to another sandwich shop I'm sure you're familiar with, Panera Bread. This series showcased all of the features of the Odd1sOut's brand that made him so loved, as well as some new skills you might not have expected from a webcomic artist. We had the same fast-paced, relatable humor that he had perfected from his webcomic, emphasized by the clean, abstract art style. And on display for the first time, at least for many people, was his voice and delivery. We often overlook how crucial those two are in a YouTuber. Most of that stuff is pretty obvious. Of course you're going to get better at editing, of course you're going to get better at your delivery. Even JonTron, who's probably one of the most charismatic people on this platform, sounded like he had just learned his dog was hit by a car before recording his first video.
The game was delayed, and even completely ported from the Quake engine to the newer and more really f***ing slow.
But the one thing that did not change was the personal storytelling. The main thing he improved were the concepts he talked about and the writing as a whole, which really wasn't that bad to begin with. One of his earliest series, Think About That, was one where he pretty much just said some random shit, hoping people would find it entertaining. One of the episodes was about how we all see ourselves naked at some point through the day, so we should treat each other with respect and charity.
What I'm trying to say is that it really puts us into perspective. Everyone in the world has seen themselves naked. No one is really better or worse. We are all people. We are all the same creatures with hopes and dreams. And I think people forget that.
Behind the meme levels of bullshit. Fortunately, he didn't feel the need to keep this up. Most of his videos still revolve around him as a person, past or present, and his personal life and thoughts, but it's in a much more grounded, fleshed out form, and usually expressed as part of a story. Time. Now, why should you care about this guy's stories? Well, James's comedy and entertainment value has always come from telling stories that people can relate to. Interestingly enough, in video form, he removed that layer of abstraction that we discussed earlier by adding context to his stories. The contrast between his videos and his comics becomes more visible in that respect, but it wasn't some gradual change, so I can't say this was an improvement over time. But it became a very effective and critical storytelling mechanism for his content. When you tell a story from your childhood, people can listen and think, hey, what if that happened to me? They can fill in the blanks from freshman year at private school and replace his school, teachers, and friends with theirs. It makes it more compelling if you think it could really happen even to you. It's almost as if it's a relatable experience. Whatever it was almost unprecedented. James had found a formula that worked, and it was working really well. But still, just because something is popular doesn't make it good. A lot of people seem to have this conception that the animation genre of videos is inherently flawed. The argument I hear a lot is that it's not really animation because the characters' mouths aren't moving, or it's not animated frame by frame, and so on. It's true that it's much lower production quality than you'd expect from, for example, Cartoon Network, but that's kinda true for literally everything on YouTube. Most of what you find on YouTube is nowhere near the standard of professionally done television. Sure, you'll have some videos and even series on YouTube that are really well fleshed out and produced, but they're oftentimes expensive to make make, and even then, it'd be a tough sell to any network. The good news is that people don't really expect that from YouTube. They just want to be entertained for free by any rando and are willing to temper their expectations accordingly. And the same goes for animated content. Sure, if you compare a video by TheOdd1sOut to anything on TV, you'll notice most of his videos come across as more quickly moving slideshows. And this is even though animation standards are much lower than they were several decades ago, when almost every frame was drawn and redrawn. But again, it's what you'd expect from some 20-year-old with a drawing tablet and a budget that mainly goes into coffee or whatever. I guess if you're gonna make a more grounded comparison, you should compare people like TheOdd1sOut to more traditional animation channels. You could compare it to animations from Pymations, or this cursed shit from Psychic Pebbles. To be fair, most of the time people qualify this by saying TheOdd1sOut or him and a few other creators are the exceptions to this rule that animators' Storytime channels, or whatever you want to call them, are lazy. It's the other channels that started sprouting up in his wake that are the problem and must be eradicated. To be honest, I was gonna go pull up some of these videos and roast them relentlessly, but I don't really know what I'd be accomplishing by that. Mainly because most of these people who make the cringy content are kids. And yeah, wow guys, kids are stupid. Real groundbreaking shit over here. Now, this isn't to say that these people shouldn't be criticized. If I didn't ask people what they thought of my videos, I wouldn't be able to improve either. Hell, if it weren't for criticism, I'd probably still be making Super Tux Kart gameplay commentary with whatever this positively bewitched atrocity this is as my avatar. The thing is, this whole copycat/clone trend that followed James's success isn't anything new. It reminds me of the whole vlogging trend from around 2016, which was when Casey Neistat was starting to gain more recognition. People saw what he was doing, saw it was working, and they said, hey, I bet I could do that. Nobody thought they were going to be doing the exact same thing as Casey. In fact, they were counting on it. Everyone lives different lives, has a different video filming and editing style, has different friends, and of course, everyone has their own unique personality. The trouble is, all of these things were really well refined in Casey's content from the beginning. Now, most people were aware of this, so they tried doing what Casey was doing because it seemed to be working for him. They bought an expensive drone and tried some of his videography techniques. They went around town just like Casey does on his boosted board, and they tried to adopt his mannerisms. But it just didn't work, because you can only fake creativity to a certain extent. What does this have to do with Storytime animation? Well, it's the same exact concept, except instead of videography, think of art style, animation, and so on. Everything else pretty much lines up exactly. In fact, it's much easier to be an animation Storytime channel, because unlike a traditional vlogger, you don't need to go out and do anything for content. Here, the creative process is really just sitting around brainstorming about whatever mediocre experience you had at some point that someone laughed at one time. And bam! You're halfway done with your video. Most of James's stories are from when he was a kid because those experiences are the most interesting and relatable to his audience. But if you're a 13-year-old Odd1sOut fan who convinced his mom to buy you a tablet and a Paint Tool size subscription, you're pretty much shit out of luck. Most of the things that you're doing now, you're going to be spending the next 5+ years trying to mentally block out before you're even capable of looking back and retelling them to an audience like James does. There's nothing wrong with understanding something is working for someone and applying it to your content. People do it all the time and it's totally fine. If your favorite animator tries a new series idea, or if they do a cool editing technique, try it out. Sure, I don't care. But if you try to just copy someone simply because you like them, you're never going to be able to recapture what makes them so good, because people are just too complicated. Critics call these channels the Odd1sOut clones, but that just isn't true. Most of these channels aren't clones because they're incomplete and different in all the wrong ways. This type of cloning is such a sloppy process, and there's so much that you'll miss that you won't learn anything. Trust me, I've tried, and it has not and will not ever work. But if you do try, then don't be surprised when it doesn't get you the views you always wanted. Most successful YouTubers started making videos for fun, not because they thought it made them millions of dollars. That certainly wasn't the reason why James started his channel. There is another side to this coin, however. Most of the channels I just talked about have fewer than 10,000 subscribers. But what about channels like JaidenAnimations, TimTom, SomeThingElseYT, and Alex Myers? Isn't TimTom just the green ones out, and Jaiden the female ones out? If you're comparing their art styles, yes, some of them are very similar. Maybe they're trying to recreate the abstractness that the Odd1sOut takes advantage of. Maybe if they overdid it and added too many of their own unique details, it would take far too long to make a video. It's not like none of these people are talented artists either. Jaiden even referenced changing her art style at one point, but for whatever reason, she's maintained a more simplified approach to her work, which I don't really see a problem with. Whatever the reasons are, the person who people seem to be identifying as the victim here, the one who is apparently being robbed, doesn't seem to have a problem with it either. Even with all this being said, maybe you still don't get it. Why are these people copying James in the first place? Have I really proved that there is any objective value in his videos? Well, maybe not. I understand that this type of content isn't for everyone, and sure, it's getting a little tired out. This genre is oversaturated by people who just can't match the Odd1sOut's charisma, delivery, and technique, and even James himself seems to be constantly in your face. He's persistently being promoted by YouTube, frequently headlines events like VidCon, and has a presence that you just can't seem to ignore. Even if you found him inoffensive and harmless before, the very fact that you hear about him so much can make you start to despise him. It certainly doesn't help that most of James's recent videos have been aided by additional artists, which personally I think removes a significant portion of the charm. It's no longer one guy with a tablet making videos, it's this massive 10 million subscriber operation, and I'm worried that his content will start to get diluted as the people he works with don't have his exact vision in mind while animating his content. Nothing lasts forever, I suppose, but that doesn't mean everything has to die. And yeah, that doesn't make much sense, but it was kind of poetic, so we'll keep it. If you absolutely despise everything about James's content, you're completely entitled to that. But maybe now you can see why he ever got to this point in the first place. It's only been a couple of years since he started making videos, but like I said, he's practically a household name. Even if you don't watch his videos, you probably know someone who does. We can complain about people like the Pauls, RiceGum, and countless other terrible YouTubers who get millions of views and make it into YouTube Rewinds. We can complain about them all we want, which is fun to watch as a viewer and to write as a YouTuber. But it's comforting to me, at least, that there are some big channels out there that aren't run by total lunatics. I guess all I'm trying to say is for being YouTube's latest golden boy, the Odd1sOut could be a lot worse.